How's it going, people? Welcome back to the channel. Welcome to a video that is based around a question that you guys often ask me either in my DMs or in the YouTube comment section, and that is, what mods are actually worth it? Like, what mods are actually worth you spending the money on? I've done a whole bunch of mods to this MX-5, as you can probably hear by the supercharger. I've done a bunch of mods as well to my Polo 9N. So I thought for those of you that like either my videos of actually modifying cars or my videos on what mods I reckon are worth it, this video I wanted to talk to you about my experiences of modifying cars and what I think has been worth the cash. So remember to like, comment, subscribe, all that great stuff. And without further ado, let's get into the video. By the way, before we begin, I recently made a video on why it sucks driving in London, and today I'm driving in London. So, Kel surprise, I'm back here again, driving around in central London in a car that was not made for this. He doesn't like speed bumps, doesn't really like anything, if I'm perfectly honest, except for tracks. And that leads me very nicely on to coilovers. Are coilovers worth it? Now, I have the VMAX Extreme suspension on this car, which are basically as good as cheap as suspension as you can get on the MX-5 in my opinion. They cost around about £350–400 and they are both height and damping adjustable, which is exactly what I wanted. Now, coilovers are one of those things that I think are very much worth it. Whether you are going for a low car or you're going for a car that handles well, whatever you're going for, I do not recommend going for super cheap coilovers. I know people love to just slam some like JOMs on or whatever. That's not for me, really not for me. I have heard so many horror stories of people going for super cheap coilovers and then having either spring snapping or just the suspension failing or getting a bad set. So actually recently my dad bought a set of coilovers and they didn't even have any gas in them. So there was literally no damping effect of those coilovers whatsoever. And trust me, as someone who has driven a car with no damping on the rear end, it's not something that you want to have happen to you whilst out on the roads. So if you're on a tight budget, which I was when I was first doing this car, make sure that you find a set of good value coilovers. They don't have to be necessarily like super expensive, but they need to give you half decent value for money, in my opinion. Another modification that I think is hugely worth it, sort of related to the suspension as well, is Polybushes. Yeah, so Polybushes are quite expensive. It depends on what car you have, but I would say anywhere normally between sort of £100 and £600 for a set that will do the entire suspension. But honestly, the difference they make is massive. They stiffen the whole car up and make everything feel that bit more focused when you're actually driving. Honestly, I can't tell you how good they are. They're quite difficult to put in, like removing old worn out rubber bushes and then replacing them with polys is quite difficult, and I've shown how to do it in a previous video. But genuinely, they are some of the best things that you can buy, and you can get cheaper ones. You can buy like cheaper Polybushes or whatever. I just say get the best value Polybushes that you can for the money. That's what I did on this, and they've worked out perfectly. We're definitely on a theme here, but another modification that I think is super worth it is anti-roll bars. Getting a stiffer set of anti-roll bars front and rear on your car, if you can be so useful. On the one hand, if you get a good set, you can get quite good adjustability, so you can have more or less stiffness or whatever it is. And then particularly on cars like this, which needs to be as stiff as possible in order to handle as good as it can, they make a massive difference. If you're getting something aesthetic, then yeah, you don't need to worry so much about polys or anti-roll bars. You could just get a good set of coilovers and that would do you nicely. But I think if you're going for something that needs to perform well, then those are just absolutely key. You should definitely go for those. On performance as well, let's talk about brakes. You can literally only go as fast as you can brake, if that makes any sense. Having taken this to Bedford Autodrome and driven it around there on a track day, the first time that I went and I had the yellow stuff brake pads on there with no supercharging, no extra power or anything like that, they worked reasonably well. They were perfect for the job. So it really depends on how much power your car's putting out. I didn't have to upgrade my brakes. I have upgraded brake discs, which just sort of grab a little bit more, and then obviously with the added yellow stuff brake pads, all in, it had quite good stopping power for the amount of speed and power that I had. The second time I went to Bedford Autodrome and I had the car supercharged with that more power and better tyres and better overall stuff in general, I still had the same brakes and yellow stuff set up on here. I wasn't able to rely on the brakes anywhere near as much now that I had more pace being carried into the corners. The brakes just weren't doing what I needed them to do. It immediately showed me that there is definite value in getting a good set of brakes on there. Whatever's going to help you with stopping power is key goods. So I would say brakes are really important to work with. Unfortunately, one key problem with brakes is that they tend to cost a lot of money. So I would always say whatever brakes will suit your needs. So like if you're going to do track days in your car, then invest in brakes. Invest in a good set of brakes, 100%. If you're not going to be going to track days and you're going to be driving around on the roads, then invest in least at a good set of pads if you're having a car that's like quite quick. If you're not driving a car that's quite quick, then just a good set of pads just are worth it. Also, as someone who has been in a car accident as a result of brakes that have failed, I will always back a good set of brakes. And again, you don't have to get a set of Brembos. Like, I'm going to try and get some Wilwoods on this at some point. The Wilwoods are around about sort of £800 to £1,000. A lot of money considering I spent £1,000 on this car, but I think that they will be worth it because when I go to track days, I will be able to stop better and therefore get faster lap times just in general. What is going on here? That Volvo is absolutely swag. Still staying below the car at this point, let's talk about tyres and let's talk about alloys. Alloys are not really worth the money, I would say, up front. It's worth getting a set that aren't going to break on you, so a set that aren't going to get absolutely grounded out in a hole or get flat spots or whatever. So that's my best suggestion. And obviously if you're going for an aesthetically pleasing car, then it's worth finding a set that you think look really good. But as an actual modification, they're not something that I would say are like worth the cash. Maybe I'm just performance focused, but I just think that they're kind of a fun extra thing to have. I think they can really upgrade the look of the car, so don't get me wrong, I absolutely love the OZs on this car, but the reason why I bought the OZs for this car, and obviously thought about colours, like I wanted to get them in bronze, etc., but the main reason was because they needed to be light. I wanted a good low unsprung mass, and these reduced it by a little bit, and I was a fan of that. They also gave me more space. I got slightly bigger wheels to get bigger brakes in the car as well, so those are my thought processes behind going for these. I personally wouldn't spend loads of cash on good looking alloys. I'd spend loads of cash on lightweight alloys, but good looking ones, you can find good looking ones relatively cheap that will still do the job. The rubber that meets the road is one of the most important things on a car. Like without your good traction, you will struggle. So again, if I take this back to the track days that I've been on, first one I went on standard road tyres, and I was constantly squealing to the edge of the tyres limits around corners. They went off really quickly, so like they heated up and then started to just like degrade and ruin themselves. Like if you ever watched F1 and you've watched how tyres go when they get hot, these tyres got super hot super quick, and so they were not worth anything. Like there was no point spending 20 quid on them to take to a track day. The Nankang NS2Rs that I have on this, on the other hand, when I took them to a track day, I did like a 15-20 minute session before I got kicked out for the noise of the car, and they did the job perfectly. Honestly, they were just so much better, and they helped with that braking a little bit, not enough in terms of the new power that I had in the car with the supercharger. But by spending, I think maybe 400 quid, I think I spent around about £400 on the tyres, they just really upgraded how the car handled. Now again, personal opinion here, I think a good handling car is always important. I also think the tyres actually look quite good. So these NS2Rs are like semi-slick style tyres, and people always ask me like, oh, what are the tyres? The tyres look mad, they look so different. It's like they were worth their money. I would have spent that again. Obviously you can go way more expensive than that, and depending on the car that you're on, it can get up to a lot of money, but I think a good set of tyres is key. Slowly making our way up here, exhausts. I would say that exhausts are probably a very difficult one. Again, performance head on here. If the exhaust is going to increase airflow and ultimately increase a bit of the brake horsepower, then yes, maybe worth spending the money on it. If it's just going to make the noise a little bit different, I obviously love a great sounding car, and I think that there are plenty of cars that you can get good exhausts on. Cheaper cars like this, I wouldn't get a random exhaust on this car just to try and make it sound better or whatever. I would just, like, I like the IL Motorsports exhaust because it does increase airflow by like 15% or something, which is good. I don't think I would have changed the exhaust on this for the sake of just making the car sound better. Feels like a lot of money to spend to just get bad looks. Exhausts do make good YouTube content though. People love exhausts, and so I'm not bashing exhausts. Like obviously a nice sounding car is always fun to have, and I do, funnily enough, like the sound of my car most of the time. It is a bit much. I wouldn't spend a really low amount of money on an exhaust. I wouldn't get like a grenade exhaust or one of those like fart exhausts. I just think that they don't sound very good, and I also think that exhausts are only worth getting on a car that's already quick. I wouldn't put an exhaust on my Polo. There's just no point. I'm not going to put an exhaust on a car that does 0 to 60 in 18 10 seconds. I am fooling no one with that exhaust. And so for me, that would feel like a waste of money. I would say this car is quite quick in its supercharged state. I don't think I liked the sound of it before I got it supercharged. Now that I got it supercharged and people look at it for a very different reason and it is quite a savage car, yeah, I'm all about it. But up until then, what was really the point? Like, it just sounds a little bit more farty than normal. And this is literally coming from someone that absolutely loves car sounds. So we've done exhaust. Let's have a think about the engine. I think that because engine mods are often very cheap, and by engine mods I don't mean modifications to make the engine faster, I mean to make it look prettier. They're generally quite cheap, like a good set of nuts and bolts and like a respray of the rocker cover or whatever. That doesn't go amiss. Like, it can actually look really nice. Good set of new pipes, etc. Those, I think they're well worth the money because they're relatively cheap and they make your engine bay look good, and that makes you look like a better overall car person because you've got a clean engine bay, which I don't have, so I look like a bad car person. Wow, look at that. Very, very nice. Beautiful. In terms of engine performance modifications, which ones are actually worth it? Well, I mean, everyone goes for like an air filter, don't they? I think like it's probably not that worth it. Like, it doesn't do enough. Like, it feels like you've just tried to go for something for the sake of it. Like, you're like, oh, I got to do something to the engine, so let's get an air filter. I'm not bashing air filters. I just think like I wouldn't necessarily spend the cash on an air filter that I would instead maybe save for something a little bit more impactful. I would say supercharging was 100% worth it on this, at least. Like, as a modification, that has just absolutely changed my my life in this car. £4 grand on a supercharger, probably not worth it, but I spent £2,250 on that other MX-5 to take the supercharger off of. Very much worth it. Once I sell that as well, I might recoup some of the cash too. So all in, I think, yes, when it comes to performance modifications like this, super worth it. They mess with your insurance, but they are they're fun. The supercharger sounds very different. I love the supercharger on MX-5 because lots of people turbocharge them. By supercharging, you get that whine instead of just the standard turbo whistle, and I like both turbos and superchargers. I just really like how this car sounds and feels. So yes, I think supercharging or turbocharging, I'm all about it. It's just very expensive, so that comes down to a case-by-case basis. Depends on what car you're driving as well. It's very difficult to say whether a turbocharger or a supercharger is worth it. On an MX-5 specifically, turbocharging or supercharging, well worth. Go for it, mate. I think it is. It's almost rude not to. The car is slow but very fun without doing the modifications. By doing the modifications, you fully upgrade the experience. Let's think about interior modifications. A new steering wheel, I need one on this at some point. Yes, I think they're worth it because often this is like your main feel of the car. A nice wheel is worth spending some good money on. Some of them are not worth it. So like the Proto T-Pose, which I want, the one that I want, the carbon one, is like 700 quid. The car cost £1 grand. You can't say that it's worth it's worth just £300 less than the entire car. But more importantly than steering wheels, seats. I think seats are super important. So obviously with the Polo, I changed it out for the GTI seats, which I think are worth their weight in gold. They cost me like £180 and I'm really happy with them. One of my favorite modifications that I've actually done to that car. Way more comfortable on long journeys, way better through fast corners. Yeah, I could rave about those seats for ages. This car, obviously the seats serve a purpose for going on track days, so yes, they're worth it. If I wasn't going on track days, would I have changed the seats? Maybe for the aesthetics. I think it really upgrades the look of the car as well, but yeah, maybe I wouldn't have. In a race car, obviously you need something like bucket seats to keep you held in nice and tight, so yes, again, very much worth it. But I wouldn't prioritize seats over some of the stuff under the car, so I wouldn't prioritize that over suspension or Polybushes or that kind of stuff. And then exterior modifications, they're really up to you. And in terms of like spending the money on them, make sure that if you're doing an external piece, you're doing it for yourself rather than because you think other people will like it. If you've done a modification for the sole purpose of other people liking it and then someone else doesn't like it, then you'll be sad about it. If you do a modification because you like how it looks and then other people don't like it, it's not that deep because you like it. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed these ramblings. I was just wanting to talk about all the different types of modifications that I have done so far and that I have found worth it and not worth it. Hopefully you've learned something from this. Hopefully it's been half useful for some of you, particularly those of you who are just getting into modifying cars. They're the people that I really like to make modification videos for. Massive thank you to the patrons as always, to you guys as well for watching. I will see you in the next one.